Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
When you and I go to high schools across the country, I often give a lecture titled Two Realities, in which I show headlines that we're all used to seeing about gun violence, wage stagnation, poverty, inequality, stuff like this. I then show data that paint a very different picture from the headlines. The punchline is that the media is a profit-seeking industry, and like any profit-seeking industry, it has a strong incentive to deliver to customers what customers want. And contrary to what we might claim, what people have demonstrated by their behavior is that they want to see bad news. They want to see things that incent them, that scare them, and so the media shows us this. In this lecture, I recommend websites like goodnewsnetwork.org that show only good news. It's a legitimate news site, but it's only good news. Let me read you off some of the headlines just from today. Microbot that targets and captures damaged cells is real-life Pac-Man. Couple makes award-winning gin after starting distillery in a shed during COVID lockdown. Coastal salt marshes are keeping up with sea level rise. Life-saving overdose drug approved by FDA for over-the-counter sales. Ocean cleanup hits milestone of 220 tons removed from the Pacific garbage patch. And it goes on and on. I've got a ton of these things. But if you start to read these, all of a sudden your outlook on the world is very different. Whereas before you think that, everything is going to hell and the world is a horrible place and people are horrible, you read these headlines and you dig into the articles and you find out, no, there's an entirely different view of the world. Now, this is only good news, but what we get in the mainstream media typically is only bad news. The truth is somewhere in between.
I go out of my way not to watch too much TV. The news will kill you. It's one lousy thing after another. But you get in your car and you drive downtown and you go to the grocery store and you know what? Nothing terrible happens.
Right.
Regular life is just that. It's regular. You're onto something here, although, God, I don't want to go to the Good News website.
Nobody wants to.
No, I don't want to. That just seems to be so broken in its own way, right? To be bombarded with an incessant pile of happy headlines. I don't want that either. Remember when you used to be able to get the news?
I was engaging with someone on Facebook just today, and this person posted a note saying no billionaires are good. No one of good character is a billionaire.
What an idiot.
And I responded to this guy. Look, in terms of purchasing power, compared to humans of just a few centuries ago, you're a billionaire. We look at life, we only look upwards to people who have more than us and say, this isn't fair, I don't have that stuff. Forgetting that the lives we live are, and this is not hyperbole, they are science fiction compared to 99.9% of the humans who have ever lived.
The ridiculous part of all of this is that purchasing power doesn't really have a thing to do with your moral worth. I would love to have the purchasing power of a billionaire. What would be better than that? I would just love to be able to go anywhere I wanted and buy anything without asking how much it costs. That's not my life. I think I can probably learn to live with that. We're mostly doing fine.
However, I invite everyone to look in the other direction. We can all go to the grocery store, and we might not be able to afford the filet mignon, but you can buy whatever it is to feed yourself, to feed your family. That itself is something that humans of a century ago had a problem doing. And beyond that, it was a serious day-to-day struggle for 99% of the population.
And I think often about the miracle and the marvel that is the modern supermarket. If I could get a hold of somebody from a couple hundred years ago, right, if we can get that time machine working, I think the first place I would take somebody is to a modern grocery store.
You don't even have to go there, James. You tell the story of Boris Yeltsin, the premier of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, going to a grocery store in the United States and saying, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, but just
how can this be possible?
Flabbergasted by it. And, 30 or so years earlier, when Khrushchev came, it was really quite something. He couldn't understand a grocery store. At least when Yeltsin came, he looked around and he said, yep, we're going to do this back in Russia. Khrushchev, arguably the second most powerful man in the world at the time, couldn't figure out what a grocery store was. The lives that regular people are privileged to lead right now are astonishing.
Again, we only look to people who have more and say this isn't fair.
I couldn't figure out which one of these two things was going to be the foolishness of the week. I thought maybe I'd lead in by talking about an article I saw in Politico this afternoon, and as always, we'll put the link in the show notes for you, that the GOP, according to the headline, is embracing a new foreign policy. Let's attack Mexico.
For what?
Drugs, Ant, where have you been? Fentanyl, the great new boogeyman. You can almost tell that there might be an election cycle coming right up. Apparently, we've got any number of Republicans who think it would be just a great idea to start bombing the hell out of Mexico. I want to remind people that Mexico is our neighbor to the south and an ally. And still, this is what they want to do. What do they never seem to think about? Legalizing drugs.
It never occurs to them that they are the problem.
And if people want to do drugs, let's maybe say, okay, go ahead. You know the risks. Your habit isn't worth bombing a sovereign state over. I don't see what the downside would be in just letting people live the lives they want to live.
Well, people are going to say things like, well, you're going to get all sorts of drug addicts because the thing is legal. Maybe you will. But are you telling me that that's worse than bombing Mexico?
You are granting access to a thing that people don't normally have access to. Some people who would not have done it under other circumstances now will. Some percentage of them will probably become habitual users. But I just want to ask people this. I'm all for legalization of all drugs. I'm well on the record here. Every now and then somebody says, oh, you're going to get heroin addicts everywhere. And my rejoinder is always the same. Oh, so you're going to rush out and try heroin? And they say, no. And I said, well, what the hell makes you think anybody else is?
Right. There's at least one person that won't be.
The people who are going to do that are people who want to do that, who are probably already doing that. What about the resources we have been dumping down this drain for decades? Imagine if we could take all of those resources and apply them to other things. Wouldn't life be better? I'm not looking for perfect answers here. I'm dealing with better and worse.
Well, what is the number? We incarcerate in this country more people per capita than any other country on the planet. It is like, I saw is by far like an order of 10 or something.
Well, there's like a little tiny footnote that you have to include here. We incarcerate more of our own people than anybody else.
Right.
There's one little tiny country that incarcerates other people. It skews what we can say about that. But we're so far out in front on the incarceration, we incarcerate more of our own people than Iran or North Korea. Chew on that for a minute. Now, people tend to overblow how many of those people are involved with illegal drugs. The implication is that if we just made drugs legal, this would no longer be the case. It would still be the case, and we've got lots of other work to do here. But this would be a hell of a start down that road. It would have the added benefit of seeing us not bomb our neighbors. There's a very long list of Republican legislators who very clearly want to.
These people seem not to learn. You can take any country in the Middle East almost and use it as an example. What happens if you bomb Mexico? You create a bunch of Mexicans that hate the United States. And now all of a sudden we have an ongoing generational animosity between the two countries.
I wouldn't blame any of them. I understand that anger. And if you really want to breed hatred for your own country, this is a hell of a first step. Anyway, I did not choose that as the foolishness of the week. It just didn't have that whimsical feel that I like the foolishness to have. But I wanted to talk about a New York City bill. This bill is going to ban discrimination based on weight by making obesity a protected class.
Let's follow this through. If obesity becomes a protected class, am I correct? You cannot refuse to hire someone on the basis of obesity?
That's correct, except in extraordinary cases that are directly impacted by the nature of the job. Just to make a ridiculous example, if you're hiring a marathon runner
right,
and somebody walks in at 687 pounds, you can say, yeah, not you. But if you're looking for somebody to work in an office, that's different. Even if that would require you to redesign the office, say, purchase special furniture, My quarrel isn't with obese people per se. My quarrel here is with this idea that somehow they require protection, with incredibly rare exception. You only get that way by making a series of very lousy personal choices. You can unget that way anytime you feel like it. It's not easy, but it can be done. It's not like saying, look, we're going to give asthmatics special protection in the workplace, which seems to me to be saying something completely different. Really, what sits beneath it is this sentiment that there's a person who's suffering through no fault of his own, and we can't make that worse. That to me seems so perfectly reasonable and decent. And then to take this kind of nonsense and turn all of that on its head and say, after you ruin your life, now we're all going to suffer for that too.
This is one of these things that I'm of two minds of. On the one hand, I'm skeptical. On the other hand, I'm thinking, okay, this is a state-level decision. Go for it. This is what having a bunch of laboratories of democracy is about.
In this case, it's a city level.
Yeah, even better.
And we've got San Francisco has done it. Madison, Wisconsin has done it. You know, there are places that have decided to do this sort of thing. In the article, if you read all the way to the bottom, you'll see that New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Jersey are all contemplating the same sort of thing on the state level. More or less the cast of characters you would have thought. What's really going to happen here, and you know it as well as I do, is that a bunch of people who have made good choices are going to end up paying for people who have made bad ones.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. If you're a full-time college student looking for something educational, fun, and free, apply to join me and James and several faculty who have appeared on Words and Numbers at the inaugural summer seminar on the theory and practice of classical liberalism. The week-long seminar is hosted by the Stevenson Institute at Wabash University and will be held June 5th through the 10th. There's no charge, and meals and lodging are provided. To apply, see the link in the show notes. I want to talk a little bit about bank runs. We had an episode recently with Pete Earle talking about the implications of the Silicon Valley Bank meltdown. Turns out there's another one in the news today, Pacific Western Bank, also located in California. Now, it hasn't gone bankrupt, but it saw customers withdraw 20% of their deposits, which meant that the bank had to turn to the Fed. It borrowed $16 billion from the Fed, another $1 or $2 billion from private financing to keep itself afloat. And I want to point out a big difference here between these things that people are calling bank runs, which they are bank runs, a big difference between this and what happened at the Great Depression with the bank runs. The big difference is, in the Great Depression, when we had bank runs, people went to the bank, they pulled their money out, and of course, when you pull your money out, the bank all of a sudden is not able to make loans. That's how it makes its money. You put your money in the bank, it turns around, it loans it out for a higher interest rate. It's like denying a grocery store groceries. It can't do its business. So in the Great Depression, people pulled their money out of the banks fearing bank failures, and that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. It brings about the bank failure. But here's the thing. Back then, when you took your money out of the bank, what did you do? You took cash, because your money was either in the bank or more likely it was in some form cash in your pocket or in your house or whatever. Today, with electronic funds, your money's pretty much always in a bank. I don't think I've carried cash in the past 2 or 3 years, save for maybe $5 or $10.
I was thinking about this just the other day. Every 4 or 5 months, I get $200-300, and I put it in my pocket, and it stays there for months.
Same here, although not that much, but I never spend it.
What's going to happen is you're going to beam your money out of one institution and into another. You're going to close an account and open another. And now I've got a question for you, right? Because we've got this thing called fractional reserve banking, and banks have to keep a certain fraction of deposits on hand.
The easier way to think of it is this. If you've got $10 cash and you deposit it in your savings account at the bank, that enables the banking system to create some amount, let's say $100 worth of loans. So every dollar that you take out of the bank in cash reduces the banking system's ability to create loans by whatever it is. But here's the thing, and you touched on it just a moment ago. Today, when you withdraw your money from a bank, you're not taking cash. I mean, maybe some people do, but typically you're transferring the money electronically from your bank account at Bank A to some new account you open at Bank B. So the money, although it does leave Bank A, possibly resulting in Bank A failing, it doesn't leave the banking system. And so you won't have this contagious meltdown through the banking system today like we had back at the Great Depression. Let me show you some other interesting numbers here. We've had this year 2 bank failures. And the media, of course, is all over that, talking about the number of bank failures in the United States. It's worth asking the question, what's typical? Now, it turns out in 2022 and 2021, we had no bank failures, but that was atypical. The usual is around 4 to 6 bank failures a year in normal times. We hit a high in 2010 of 157 bank failures.
That seems right, given what I remember of that period.
Yeah. Now, what is noteworthy this time around is the value of the bank failure, so how much assets the failing banks had. This year is over $300 billion, and that's over $300 billion just in the first 3 months of the year. That is not a record, but it's close to it. In 2020, I think was the next largest. We had almost $500 million worth of bank failures.
The articles that I have been reading in the past couple of weeks all hammer away at the same point that you're making here. We don't have a wholesale problem on our hands. People in Congress are grandstanding because that's what congressmen do. People in the investment community are spooked because that's what they do. But there doesn't seem to be a wholesale problem here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing either in the empirics, in the numbers themselves, or in the theory how these things work. I'm not seeing a major problem in the offing.
So let's switch gears to something that is a systemic problem that the World Health Organization is predicting will hit Europe and Central Asia. Quote, if something isn't done politically, which is always what organizations like the World Health Organization thinks needs to happen. There is presently a huge and growing doctor shortage in Europe and Central Asia. I wonder why.
Has anybody pointed to regulation?
Well, you could bet that the article I'm reading from Bloomberg News doesn't get there. They just breathlessly report that the WHO says that we need a political solution to this problem. They don't say that we've got a politically caused problem on our hands. If government tells doctors what they can and cannot charge, which is the only way that costs can be dictated by governments, then doctors' salaries are, for all intents and purposes, predetermined. And when doctors' salaries are low, rational people who thought, I might want to become a doctor, think twice about that because it's really hard to become a doctor. It takes a long time, a lot of effort, and a lot of dedication. And if there's not even the hope of a payout at the end of that road, smart people will go do something else, which is exactly what they're doing throughout all of the countries with socialized medicine. In the United States, what did we see the minute Obamacare passed? A bunch of old timers all retired. And then for anybody who was out looking for a doctor, it became almost impossible to go find a GP. Why? Because the few that were left weren't taking new patients.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, you were forced as a matter of law to go pay good money to buy an insurance policy, which you then could not use because no doctors would take it.
There's a trade-off here. You either pay with higher prices or you pay with shortages. There's no way around this. If you have the government step in...
We often say that you pay with time.
Yeah, if you're going to look at the high-priced healthcare and say government needs to do something here, the only thing government's going to be able to do is to create a shortage. That is, hold the price down legally, and that will cause exactly what you're seeing in Europe, the shortage of doctors. We're simply not paying them enough.
It turns out that we've happened upon an answer here in the United States that I think is starting to work pretty well. And I would not have predicted this, but the market provides, and it's the movement towards physician assistants. Come to find out, half of the doctors I see aren't PAs, and I love them. I find that they stay more current than the MDs do. I find that they actually enjoy caring for patients more than MDs do. They're in this middle ground, I think, between high-end nurses and GPs. And even on the specialist side, I see a number of specialists who, when you look at their credentials, are not MDs at all. They are routinely my favorite of the bunch. I love dealing with the PAs. They look you in the eye, they give you 5 minutes more time in a session. But isn't it interesting how we happened upon this in response to a shortage?
Right. It's the market doing what it can, given the constraints the government has placed on it.
It's really amazing how well the market works.
But there's something else here worth underlining. When people use the phrase right, that you have a right to health care, be very careful using that term, because when you say you have a right to something, that implies that it is fitting and proper for the government to step in and procure this thing on your behalf, which typically means taking it from somebody else and giving it to you. And so I say, look, what are you going to do when we don't have enough doctors and you claim you have a right to health care? If that's true, then the government should conscript people, force them to go to medical school so that you can have the health care that is your quote-unquote right. And people look at me and say, oh, that would never happen. Well, here's the example. In Europe, you supposedly have this right to health care, but there aren't enough doctors. So is it a right or isn't it? If it is a right, the governments of Europe should be drafting people into medical schools. If they're not going to do that, then you actually don't have a right to health care.
The obvious rejoinder here is that we've got a classic case of rights in conflict, right? We've got this idea of a positive right to health care, but then we've got this negative right of self-determination, that no government can tell an individual what he must do for a living. This is a problem with our rights talk in the West, right? When we've conflated positive rights and negative rights into the category rights, they're not the same thing. And when we talk about them as if they were the same thing, well, I mean, obviously you get all kinds of incongruities like this. You know, the more interesting thing is taken from my time in Iraq, called the BAC test, the baccalaureate test, and it was given to every student as you graduated high school, kind of like a mandatory SAT. Mm-hmm. The score that you got on the BAC test determined what you were going to be. It didn't determine the choices you were going to get. It determined what you were going to be. So if you got, a 99, congratulations, you're a doctor.
Yeah, like it or not, go to medical school.
Now go to medical school. And, a couple of notches down, congratulations, you're an architect. Mm-hmm. I don't doubt that that's a pretty effective way to get the right people into the right jobs.
You're going to end up with too much of one thing and not enough of another.
And not only that, you're not going to get the people into the jobs they want. And as a result, they will be miserable. People should have the ability to determine what they do for their own lives. But, when you look at the incentives that we are now placing on would-be doctors, we should not be surprised to find that there are fewer of them. And there are fewer of them in all of the countries with socialized medicine.
As a footnote, I guarantee you that people who are in favor of socialized medicine are going to look at that and say, no, James, you haven't identified the problem. The problem is the government didn't do enough.
Well, if the government does more, there'll be even fewer doctors.
That's right.
So go have at it.
Be a good example for the rest of us.
When you see how things work, you should kind of assume that trends continue.
Something interesting happened this week. The Labor Department recently ruled that retirement fund managers may weigh what's called ESG, environment, social governance factors, in investment decisions.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What role does Congress have in telling retirement fund managers how to do their jobs?
Well, the way it's worded thus far, and this is where I become ambivalent. The way it's worded thus far is that retirement fund managers may weigh ESG factors, environment, social governance, in their investment decisions.
But the presumption is that Congress can say may not.
That's what bothers
me. May not bothers me and must bothers me. What role does Congress have here at all? Whoever's hiring the retirement fund manager, those are the people who get to decide what they may or must do.
My problem is when may ultimately becomes must. But nonetheless, the fact is Congress is messing with this. So we have the Labor Department ruling that retirement fund managers can take into account these environmental, social, governance factors when deciding how to invest your retirement money. Congress passed a resolution saying, no, Labor Department, you may not say that. President Biden just recently vetoed that resolution, which now puts us back at the beginning where the Labor Department says, yeah, you can take into account ESG factors when planning your investment. I kind of fall where you do. So long as it's not mandatory, so long as Congress isn't saying you have to take into account environmental, social, governance factors when you're investing in various stocks, as long as it isn't mandatory, I say it's actually a good thing. Let people decide for themselves. The market's going to drive this process.
And, we already have portability in retirement accounts. If you can take your retirement money out of one kind of account and put it into another, let the market speak. Now, if you're doomed to be in an account that takes into account all of these kind of nonsense things, and it's going to cost you a small fortune over time, okay, then now we probably got a problem. I'm still not sure what role Congress plays, given that I've read Article 1, Section 8, and nowhere in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution do I find any language to indicate that Congress has the right to legislate about retirement accounts.
The reason I'm in favor of this, the ESG allowance, is because it's your money. And if you're concerned about the environment and you only want to invest your money in environmentally friendly companies, that's fine. Go with God. It's your money. You decide what you want to do with it.
The same way, if you only want to invest in companies that you think despoil the environment, go nuts there too.
I ran some numbers to see how ESG stocks compare to stocks at large. So I'm comparing the official list of ESG off of the Standard & Poor's top 500 stocks to the overall Standard & Poor's 500. And what you find is actually the opposite of what I expected. I expected the ESG stocks to perform worse. Over the past 5 years, they earned, on average, almost 1.5 percentage points greater return than the S&P 500.
I would opine that they have done a much better job of prevailing upon the investing public that they're doing the right thing by appearing to do the right thing.
Yeah, and that's what I wondered. How much of that 1.5 percentage point bump that the ESG stocks have, how much is due to the fact that ESG companies are actually more productive, more profitable, and how much is due to the fact that this is maybe a fad? People are jumping on board, and in jumping on board, they're driving the prices of those stocks up?
I mean, it would be interesting to compare the profit-to-earnings ratio of both groups.
I'll do you something different there. If you look at the past 5 years, the ESG stocks outperform the general population of stocks by about 1.5 percentage points. That's on average over the past 5 years. If you look on average over the past 3 years, they outperform by a lesser amount, 1.3 percentage points. And if you look over the past 1 year, they outperform by 1/3 of 1 percentage point. Now, that pattern is what I would expect if indeed this outperformance of the ESG stocks was simply due to a fad that people said, oh yes, I want to invest in ESG stocks, and that drives the price up. And then over time they realize maybe I'm not going to put my money here. I'm going to put it in better performing stocks. And so the delta goes away.
Something that we're looking at here is very similar to the nonsense that we looked at with green investing not too terribly long ago, when it was high on everybody's list, right, all the way to the point that in the Obama administration, it became very important for the government to pick winners. Mm-hmm. And green companies got all kinds of government largesse, which is a fancy way of saying that the government stole money from taxpayers and gave it to companies that were spouting off a bunch of green nonsense. How do I know this? Those green companies are all largely gone at this point.
Yes, and if anyone wants to check this, look up Solyndra, which was a multi-billion-dollar boondoggle.
Yeah, it was the absolute poster child for this. Government's not in the business of picking winners. It's an umpire. And every time it starts to pick winners, what it's really doing is picking losers, and the losers are always the taxpayers.
Let me go back for a moment to my hypothesis that what may be going on here with this greater return to the ESG stocks was that it was simply a fad. People are jumping on board because these are green stocks or what have you. Let me give you one other supporting piece of information there. Turns out there's an official list of ESG stocks. And to get on the list, you have to have, a certain carbon footprint, and you have to have equity and hiring and promotion, these sorts of things. Let me give you just 2 examples here. ExxonMobil, the 4th largest oil company on the planet.
Boo, despoilers.
Yes.
Greedy, boo.
It's on the list. It's an ESG company. You know who isn't on the list? Tesla, the maker of electric cars.
But everybody loves Tesla.
Yeah, I don't know how ExxonMobil got on the list. Who knows? Maybe they planted a bunch of trees to offset their carbon footprint. I don't know. But I do know that Tesla got knocked off of the list because apparently they did not promote enough minorities and women. So again, I'm all for this ESG thing so long as it is completely above board and voluntary. It's your money. You decide what you want to do with it. Just don't force anybody into it.
But every time any group of people decides that they want to do something in a particular way, in a voluntary manner, step 2, let's make everyone do it this way.
I think it's a good idea, therefore everyone should do it.
That's right. And if they don't think so, it's such a good idea, we have to force them. I'm not sure that I like this any better, but it is interesting. I think the headline was chosen in a tongue-in-cheek way. Are we growing more dumber? Americans' IQ scores drop in 4 of 5 measurements.
More dumber.
Yes, more dumber. Does intelligence change over time? When I would talk to college freshmen and sophomores, they were utterly convinced of their own intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
They were so convinced that Plato had nothing to teach them because he lived so long ago, and why do we have to learn from dead white males? I would always ask the same thing. I would say, look, take the ancient Greeks and take the oldest portions of the Old Testament and take some ancient Chinese and Indian Buddhist writers. Really take a long, hard look at what you see when you read these authors. Are the characters in their stories any different than the people you meet on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is no, of course not. If they were that different, we wouldn't read these things anymore. But the fact that they're not different yields out all kinds of timeless lessons. How much smarter do people get over time? And I know pointing to Plato is to cherry pick the absolute smartest from the bunch, but why wouldn't I pick the smartest from the bunch, put him up against the smartest from the bunch today, and then take into account the difference in world population then to now, and the probability that you would get one person that smart ever? I don't think people are any smarter now, but are they getting dumber? Do you see evidence of people getting dumber in the last small batch of years, which is what these tests are going to measure?
Do you have a gut reaction? Because I do.
My guess is that it's going to end up always being something a lot like statistical noise, brought about for things like, for example, what are the sorts of things that we think are important right now? How do people learn right now versus 10, 15, 20 years ago? And how many of the things that we're doing now that we think are important now are the tests lagging behind? You would think that these tests are probably adjusted on a pretty constant basis to account for things like this. Just to give you a quick example, did you know that the wife and I can write in code here at the house? We could write things on a piece of paper that the children can look at. And my children are 22, 20, and 18. The children can look at and not comprehend at all. We call it cursive writing.
That's funny.
Obviously, that one doesn't fit. But how many things are kind of like that?
Right.
That change over time? How do you measure that? Is it the case that we're still measuring things that are antiquated, that have drifted out of people's lives but have not drifted out of the test, and that will be reflected in strange scoring patterns?
You're talking about the actual subject matter changing. I think that's absolutely correct.
Or just the presentation of the things, right?
But there's another change that's a little more fundamental, and that is as we become more technologically advanced, we've tended to deepen our knowledge rather than to broaden it. Today, you talk about a physicist. A physicist, PhD physics, knows a hell of a lot about physics. probably not so much about music or botany or philosophy.
Philosophy, which was the basics for physics once upon a time.
Yeah. In Plato's day, the philosopher and the physicist were one and the same.
Same guy. And I'll give you another and maybe a better example, right? So one of the things that was always measured in IQ tests was vocabulary. With every single thing that the world has ever known available to look up in literally 1 second, is your vocabulary as important as it once was?
Right.
Are you going to spend a lot of time memorizing vocabulary words? Because that's how you and I learned once upon a time. Rote memorization of vocabulary words. Well, what do you do when you come across, well, this probably happens to you all the time, but me almost never, when I'm reading and I come across a word I don't know, I highlight it, I copy it, I paste it into a search bar, I hit enter, I get not only the definition, but the etymology. That used to take me a lot longer. In a best case scenario, I used to have to get up from wherever I was, walk in, find the dictionary, get it out, and hope that it had the information I wanted. We got better dictionaries as we had more money over time, right? And for smart people, owning a copy of the Oxford English Dictionary was such a big deal.
You'd run to a word you don't know and ask your mother, and she'd say, go look it up, and then be watching over your shoulder until you did do that.
Go look it up.
Now you just right-click on the thing.
And, think about the skills you needed to go look it up.
You got to know how to spell it, first off.
If it's a word you heard rather than read, because there's all kinds of words that, I'm not going to know how to spell. I'm really bad at spelling. I have a PhD, for God's sake, and I can't spell as well as some of these 8th grade kids. And then you've got to learn rules. Does MC come before MA? And then, what if your dictionary doesn't have it? Now you got to go find a better dictionary. Your ass might end up at the library before you're all done with this.
You're not sure. Do you need a better dictionary, or have you just spelled it wrong?
Do you know the last time I went to a library?
I think the last time I went was in 1989.
I have no idea the last time I went to the library. Everything was a gigantic pain in the ass. Now it's real easy. All right, so back to the matter at hand. What exactly are we testing? And I'm pretty sure that most of the testing we do lags behind the way we do things in regular life. Is that going to cause an apparent decline in IQ scores? I think it might. Do I see evidence that people are getting dumber over time? No, not really. I find evidence that they change over time, and I think they get softer and more annoying. All kinds of things that I wish they didn't get. Dumber? No, I don't think so. And that was one of the big surprises I had, frankly, when you and I started going to high schools. I thought for sure I would get to these schools and I'm going to find a bunch of kids there who I just think are morons. And I didn't find that at all. I found articulate, concerned,
interested,
intelligent young people. And granted, they don't bring us to talk to the lowest rank of students in every school. We get brought in to talk to the college-bound kids, but they were no dumber than the college-bound kids when I was younger. If anything, I think they're better.
Let me suggest an observation bias, understandably leading people to this conclusion that people are becoming dumber. And the observation bias goes like this. In the 50s, something like 20% of people went to college. Maybe less than that, maybe 10% of people went to college. Now over 50%, probably close to 60% of people go to college.
Yeah, so the average college student isn't as good as it once was.
More than that, when you see some random person who has a college degree, in the 1950s, that meant something more than it does today.
More and radically different.
Right, so your expectation is different.
There was a phrase, he's a college man.
Right.
And that was a big deal. It's not a big deal anymore. Any fool with a checkbook can be a college man now. How do I know this? I once worked at a college with open enrollment, which meant literally anybody can go.
Yeah, which is almost all colleges now. So what we've got on the one hand is seeing people who we have this expectation that they would be smarter because they're college graduates, and they're not, and we think that people are getting dumber, when in fact all that's happening here is people are getting this stamp on their forehead who didn't get it before.
Yeah.
Another thing that's happening is communication. Prior to the internet, if you were a dumb person with dumb ideas, you could maybe communicate them through speaking. You could speak those dumb ideas to the guy who's next to you.
Your neighbors all knew you were stupid.
But that was it. It was confined to the neighbors.
Nobody in the next neighborhood over. That's right. Nobody in the next neighborhood had any idea.
Now with the internet, everybody can say whatever they want. And so the dumb people have a megaphone that they didn't have before.
You know, you're hitting on things, and I think everything you're talking about is absolutely correct. But I also think it's beside the point by the time you think about IQ tests, right? This is trying to get to something objective. I'll say this. I'm not terribly alarmed by it.
I share that. I'm not alarmed either.
On that happy note, we should call it a day here. Until next time, be nice to each other.
And send email.
For God's sake.
wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Just shut up for once, kid.
wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Idiot. Fucking idiot. See you next week, Ant.
See you next week, James.